This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Russ Hugo, and welcome back to the I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. And today, helping me to explore minute 61, which is running from approximately 60 minutes up to 60:59, is once again the great Jim Beard. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you. How could you divide my favorite scene, like right in the middle of it? How could you do that?
Well, it's longer than 1 minute, Jim. It's not my fault. You can talk to the script writers. I'm sorry.
It's just so funny, you know. No, I'm really glad. Like, if my minutes had ended like halfway through this scene, I would have been pretty mad. I'm really glad that I get to talk about the whole scene.
Well, being that it's your favorite scene, I'm going to let you start us off with this minute again.
Scully has gone to see Father Joe, and she really has one single purpose. He has told her, don't give up, in an earlier scene, and she wants to know what he means. And basically, he's telling her, I don't know. Why would you think that I would know? You know, or what answer do you want? Or that, then things really kind of get terse. And really, like, because I don't really think it begins with the real Scully, but the real Deana. Scully really then comes into it, and the fire comes up again. I really love it when she says, you know, don't quote scripture at me. You know, there's some real fire in that line. And you know, I would never really have guessed where it was going to go as far as he starts to have a seizure. Again, I really, you know, really relish this entire encounter.
Some of the things that stand out to me, we hinted at them at the previous minute, and what's confusing too is that the minutes are a bit weird depending what version you watch, so there's some overlap on where it starts and where there are. So there might be a little bit of a discussion touching back on the previous minute and bleeding over here. But I mentioned earlier in the last minute, if you listen to it, that Father Joe stands in the doorway when Scully enters, and there is that uncomfortable physical imposition. And then when she comes in the room, he pressures her to sit down. Says, please, I insist.
Yeah,
and there's just this.
I wondered what you thought of that line. Yeah, I insist. That was strong. That was, you know, kind of rough. It was an interesting way to handle that. You know, I insist that you sit down.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. I would go so far. There's a subtle violence to it. It makes me personally very uncomfortable to have. Especially that setting. Like, I'm going to sit on this strange bed next to this person who, in this horrible, disgusting room with this person who I loathe. And the fact that Scully does is a very interesting choice, because the Scully that we think of in general, and it gets to your point, probably wouldn't do that. Probably would be a little bit more assertive. But here she has this need to know. It is going to accommodate that request and play ball to get the information that she wants. And also, I mentioned in the previous minute, starts off with Father Joe in the doorway. There's a physical imposition, and then when we later see the first confrontation between the two, even though they're both standing, obviously Father Joe's taller, but the camera does do a lower angle. And then as the conversation shifts, the longer it goes on, Scully becomes higher in the frame until it ends at the very end of the scene where he is prone on the ground, shaking, or on the bed with the seizure. So there is, not in just in the sense of your correct assessment that Scully is coming into her own throughout the scene, but even the language of the camera is reinforcing that view there. Just the power shift as it transitions.
There was a moment that flickered through my head when he starts to have the seizure that there was a chance that he could be faking it. I don't really remember or know whether at this point he knows that she's a doctor. I don't know if there was any sort of like introduction at all made that he would know. You know, I mean, that would be like the silliest thing to do, to try to fake a seizure, you know, with a doctor present. But I mean, obviously that goes away, you know, pretty quickly, and you realize he really is having one. But I like what it does to her, because again, it kind of makes her sort of vulnerable again, or whatever, that she reverts to full doctor mode, you know, and that she suddenly has a patient on her hands, a guy that she, you know, can't imagine that she'd ever want to touch. You know, I mean, she's that sort of disgusted by his past and what he did. And she's, you know, she's forced to do so many things in this whole scene, and now the ultimate, she actually has to touch this guy, but you know, she took an oath, right?
I think that she or he does not know what her occupation is or anything, because she kept saying, she opens the conversation saying, "What do you know about me? Do you know anything about me?"
That's right. And then
she says, that's right. Other than you loathe me and you're a woman of faith. And then she even asserts, or he assumes and then asserts, that Mulder is her husband.
Yes, that's a wonderful little bit. Just the way he's not my husband. Well, you know what's funny about that? That's another thing that I wasn't really up on going into this movie. I didn't see I think at least the last 2 seasons of the show. So at some point I do know that they finally did consummate their relationship, which to me was a mistake, but that's neither here nor there right now. I was surprised, and I know this is not my minute. Like, suddenly in this movie, they're in bed together, and it was like my brain skipped a track here. So the husband line was very, very interesting. If it's not jumping around too much, I wanted to ask you what you felt about the line about that he had castrated himself. I think he said at the age of 26.
Yeah, 26. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What did you think about that?
I think, obviously, this is a very troubling plot line and a very challenging one to put into a pulp thriller. Mm-hmm. It's a serious subject matter when you're talking about these things, and so it's hard to even talk about it on a podcast in a way that's
sure,
responsible and respectful. Respectful to victims, if you to be clear there. But you could see it as necessary for plot reasons that they implied it. They say, like, so in other words, to suggest that certain behaviors or things didn't happen after a certain period of time, or I mean, obviously abuse could still occur, but certain things, and then also to complicate the dynamic. I think the main reason is to complicate the dynamic between Scully and Joe, and also the viewer and Joe, providing evidence for the line he states. So he says, the men who call this vile box of monsters home, you know, we hate each other because we hate ourselves. And, you know, where do they come from? Where are these appetites? I don't know how much of this I'm going to edit out, because this is a 20-hour podcast that you would need a therapist and a psychologist on board. But I'm just speaking of it from a screenwriting position, that this is something that if you're going to have this discussion between Scully and you want to really challenge it, I think that's why that phrase is there, for those reasons I outlined. What do you think?
Yeah. I didn't care much for that line being in there, and I kind of wondered why it was there, and I almost sort of accused the movie of being sensationalistic. Like it risked being sensationalistic at that point. I'm not really sure it was necessary to have that line in there. It that's an intense line, and yeah, it does add the complexity and everything. And then I kind of looked at the character, and I wasn't sure exactly why at that moment he was saying that to her. I much more preferred the whole part about you don't judge me, and him saying like, well, you're judging me, which kind of doesn't cast a very good light on Scully. But
you deserve to be judged is what she responds.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty high and mighty, but I mean, I guess that's, that Deana has that in her though too.
Well, you're talking about that crime. I'm going to be on Deana's side on this one.
Yeah, okay. I'm not excusing that crime.
No, I know you're not. I know.
Yeah, I know. It's I know. I mean, it's funny because it obviously adds to her character, which is a good thing, but I think when you like a character, it's sometimes hard to hear them have to say very harsh, things like that. But yeah, going back to the original thing we were talking about, I don't know if that was really necessary, and I think it did really risk just being in there because it's just to be sensationalistic, with that. It was maybe to me the only real kind of sour note in the scene.
Or a fair take on things. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the quoting Proverbs, glory to God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter. And I wonder, I mean, in one way you could almost read that as if it's the script writers. You could say glory to the X-Files writers to conceal a thing, but the honor of the viewers to question. In other words, we're not going to give you the answers because that's our right, and it's an honor of yours to have to wrestle with the material. I don't necessarily think that they did that, but that they put that in there for that reason. But it is a reading I took away from it when I rewatched it this time.
As they would say in The Prisoner, that would be telling. To me, that whole thing takes me down a rabbit hole because we learn later that he sees the Proverbs numbers in a vision, I assume, because he's seeing that mailbox later, right? But he's able to actually equate that to a proverb that will actually be something that he can use and work with. And that just takes me down this, like that way lies madness. Like it's wheels within wheels to me. Like it just so happens that, they use that, she uses that clue like later on, but it also works to him that that there is a proverb with the numbers, and it's something that he can actually use and say and make a point with. That's just like, wow. Like that's kind of complicated, but interesting.
I don't know what the writers intended. My reading of it was that he does not know that there is that connection. That it is instead just providence. This is about Scully and faith. I want to believe the title to me is Scully. It's her saying that, not Mulder. That's the inversion. And at the end, with the mailbox, is her making that connection about her questioning and that connection. And that's her basically allowing herself to make some sort of trust and connection with Father Joe as a messenger of basically using a vessel of cruelty, of evil, let's say, for good. And it's, not necessarily logically coherent in the film because it kind of comes out of nowhere and they don't get a lot of time to really comment on it. but that's how I've always read it, is that it is just one of those beats, and it is through that she gets the drive at the end to go ahead with the surgery.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I didn't see it that at all. I for some reason, and I didn't even question it, I figured that was numbers that he had seen, in a vision or whatever.
He might have, but I didn't get that, because he keeps saying, I don't know what this means, and he doesn't seem like a character that would hide something if he could tell somebody. Because throughout that, he seems to disclose everything that he could. But you could totally be right.
But that, yeah, and I don't mean to be argumentative here with that, but I could excuse it, like, because they're seeing that confrontation is getting more intense or whatever, that he doesn't then relay that information, and then we go towards the seizure and all of that. But that's almost a bridge too far for me, because that's one hell of a coincidence if he just brings that up, because I don't know why that would mean anything to her if she was not assuming that he had seen that in a vision. I mean, to me, that's finally the connection when she sees that mailbox and everything, that maybe that's at the point where she can believe that he's for real. But I mean, I don't know. I don't want to tear apart what you're saying or whatever, I mean, it's all good, but
that's why we're here.
I just totally, it's not even like assumption. I just took that and I said, okay, well, he's got that in his head because he's seen it, and that's, but he wouldn't have known what that meant. And he didn't really have time to go into, like, well, I saw that Proverbs, in my head or whatever, but fair point.
Not a defender, and I welcome any critiques on these things. The reason I kind of lean that way both is for the plot, but because the line itself, the verse, applies to Scully's position and the film and their conversation. In the sense, it's not coming out of nowhere. If he was just walking around one day and it says, like, I see 25.2, or you're talking about Proverbs, or Proverbs 25.2 is talking about how much grain is in the stores and the cattle are coming for winter. And she's like, what does that mean? I don't know. But the fact that it relates directly to the conversation they're having, and it relates to Scully's entire arc of the movie, if not the entire point of the X-Files, that's the reason why I think it's outside of Father Joe's agency or purview, and it goes back to the broader concept of just, again, the X-Files idea of providence.
I guess I'll just say, well, God works in mysterious ways. How's that?
There you go.
Yeah.
And speaking of, anything that you'd like to talk about before we wrap up this minute?
No, I think I said everything, but I'm all charged up. Like I just watched that scene again. I might have to go back and watch it for a third or fourth time.
Yeah, there's a lot of claustrophobia, and there's some fun parallels when we jump from scene to scene. That they're in this horrifying box. It's yellow, and there is a disturbing sound from outside, and he describes it as a vile box of monsters. And then in the next scene, we cut to a box with monsters on the outside with scary sounds, and it's a yellow box, so there's this fun jump. Before we get to that, we'll be back to cover minute 62 very soon, but until then, always remember, trust no one.